Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on this beautiful, sunny, warm day. Considering what we've gone through this past week, we're delighted that you have come to join us today. We are excited to be dedicating a new historical marker here in MacArthur Park, this one dedicated to commemorating the contributions of African American soldiers during the Civil War. This is the third historical marker that we will have installed behind the museum around the historic parade grounds. And these three all relate to Arkansas and the Civil War, and each of them we have been very privileged to partner with the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program through a grant program that they offer to provide individuals like us and other local entities the opportunity to commemorate their local historical events. And so we appreciate the funding through that program. I'd also like to recognize one of my board members, Dave Grunwald, who provided additional funding to make this possible. And we encourage you at the conclusion of Mark's program here to join us out back. We're actually going to have the unveiling of that marker. And in the 20-something years that I have been here, one thing I love about these historical markers is that they're available for people to enjoy, to view, to learn any time of the day, whether we're open to the public or not. I cannot tell you the number of times I've come to work early in the morning and some people have been out there doing the morning walk and they stop and they learn and they read, they learn about our local history. And so that's a great asset I think that these historical markers provide. This is especially poignant for us. We have been working to get this day accomplished for almost a year. It takes an extremely long period of time to get these historical markers fabricated by the company in Ohio. And then we find it very poignant that it arrived and we can have this ceremony dedicating it in Black History Month, which is very important for us and our mission here as a museum commemorating the contributions of African Americans and all Arkansans in our military history. So we're very privileged to do that and very fortunate to have it occur today. We're also very fortunate that this is part of an event that is very significant for our museum because it's part of the Camden expedition. And this building is recognized by the federal government as a National Historic Landmark because of the Camden expedition. So it is our goal to have this marker and others like it help us to relate part of our mission to the audience, the people who enjoy MacArthur Park at all days and hours of the time. We're privileged today to have as our speaker, Mark Christ. Many of you know Mark for the many years that he worked with the Heritage Department. Many of you have read the books and articles that he's written. We worked with him for a number of years doing programs like this. He also does a bus tour for us to commemorate and to visit a lot of these historic sites, including the Camden expedition. And so we're just delighted to have him come join us. After he finishes his program, we would ask you all to join us directly behind the museum where we're going to have the unveiling of the marker. And so please join me in welcoming Mark Christ.
Thank you, Stephen. Okay. So black soldiers had fought and died in the country's earliest wars, but in 1820, the U.S. War Department issued an order that no Negro or mulatto would be received as a recruit of the Army. That order remained in place for more than 40 years, but with the advent of the Civil War, some called for the immediate recruitment of black regiments. Among the loudest and most persistent of those advocates was Frederick Douglass, who was the publisher of Douglass's Monthly and acted as a spokesman for free blacks throughout the North. In October 1861, he editorialized, "Let the slaves and free colored people be called into service and formed into a liberating army to march into the South and raise the banner of emancipation among the slaves." It would be many months before that would happen. Some of the men who would later join the Union Army followed Major General Samuel Curtis's Army of the Southwest as it marched across eastern Arkansas in the summer of 1862. The army was mobbed by slaves who, one Yankee soldier noted, seemed to understand the matter very clearly and are on the alert to make escape by any opportunity. Ignoring the fact that he did not have the authority to do so, Curtis immediately began emancipating the runaways. The soldier even seized printing presses to print emancipation forms. One Iowa artilleryman, Okay. One Iowa artilleryman explained that Curtis employed the slaves to remove the log and brush and clear the road, for which services he gave them their families free papers as contraband of war. The first slaves to be set free by the rebellion. When the hard-marching Federals arrived in Helena in mid-July, they were followed by more than 3,000 freed slaves, many of whom would be later be recruited into the Union Army. And this photo is a photo of one of the contraband camps at Helena during the Civil War. As Curtis and his army were establishing a base and contraband camps in Helena, Congress took two actions that would have a profound effect on the Union war effort. On July 17, 1862, Congress passed the Second Confiscation Act, allowing the seizure of all Confederate property, regardless of whether it was being used in the rebel war effort. The act also contained a provision allowing President Lincoln to employ as many persons of African descent as he may deem necessary and proper for suppression of the rebellion. Congress also approved the Militia Act, which repealed the 1792 law barring blacks from serving in the Army and made it possible for African Americans to enlist. And after the Union Army won a victory at Antietam in September 1862, Lincoln announced that as of January 1, 1863, all slaves within the Confederate States of America shall be thenceforward, and forever free. Okay, the Bureau of Colored Troops was organized in May 1863, and Adjutant General Lorenzo Thomas was tasked with raising black units in the Mississippi River Valley. He spoke at Helena on April 6, 1863, and the next day recruiting began, with Thomas reporting that I authorized a regiment this morning, and at noon, 3 companies of 100 each were ready for muster. These would be the first of 5,526 black men credited to Arkansas units, which I will now discuss in detail. Wrong button. Okay. The companies Thomas wrote about were the first 3 of what would become the 1st Arkansas Infantry Regiment, African descent. The first mustered in on May 1, 1863, and was sent to Lake Providence, Louisiana 5 days later. On June 29, 1863, Companies E and G were at Mound Plantation, Louisiana, when they were surrounded by thousands of Confederates of the 12th, 19th, and 30th Texas Cavalry, whose black soldiers fought for 6 hours before surrendering. The regiment's designation was changed to the 46th U.S. Colored Infantry on March 11, 1864. They served in Louisiana and Mississippi before mustering out at Brownsville, Texas on January 30, 1866. A total of 1,213 men served in the 1st Arkansas. 306 of them died. Okay, the 2nd Arkansas Infantry Regiment, African descent, fought in the July 4, 1863 Battle of Helena, suffering 2 wounded before it mustered in on September 4, 1863. The regiment served there until transferring to Little Rock in January of 1864. It became the 54th U.S. Colored Infantry on March 11. And this photo here is one of 3 photos of known photos of black troops in Arkansas. This is Aaron Brooks of the 54th. Okay. The regiment moved to Fort Gibson in the Indian Territory that summer and fought at the 2nd Battle of Cabin Creek in September. They later escorted wagon trains between Arkansas and Kansas, and in 1865 skirmished with Confederate raiders along the Arkansas River. The regiment mustered out between August 8 and December 31, 1866. The 3rd Arkansas Infantry, African descent, was actually raised in St. Louis and Cape Girardeau, Missouri, before mustering in on September 4, 1863. The regiment was transferred to Helena, and while mainly performing fatigue duties, also participated in several expeditions and scouts into enemy territory. It became the 56th USCT on March 11, 1864. The regiment fought in several skirmishes in early 1864, and 3 companies fought at Wallace's Ferry, which I will discuss more later. They manned the batteries at Helena and protected contraband camps, and men of the 3rd helped set up Southland College for black students before mustering out on September 15, 1866. The regiment lost 25 men in battle and 649 to disease. And this is Sergeant Baldwin, who fought at Wallace's Ferry and was wounded in the neck. Okay, the companies of the 4th Arkansas Infantry, African descent, were organized at Devall's Bluff, Little Rock, and Helena, and mustered in on December 1, 1863, becoming the 57th U.S. Colored Infantry on March 11, 1864. 100 of them served as pioneers during the Camden Expedition in the spring of '64, and the regiment was involved in several skirmishes while on garrison duty at Helena and Little Rock. They transferred to Fort Smith in August of 1865, and several companies mutinied when ordered to march to New Mexico, where they arrived in June 1866. They transferred to Fort Leavenworth, Kansas on October 29, 1866, and mustered out on December 31. And this is the color guard of the 57th USCT. The 5th Arkansas Infantry, African descent, which would become the 112th U.S. Colored Troops, began recruiting in the spring of 1864 and was organized at Little Rock between April 23 and November 4 of '64. They served their entire service in Little Rock, though a detachment fought off Confederate guerrillas in the April 2, 1865 skirmish at Hickory Station on the Grand Prairie. The 6th Arkansas Infantry, African descent, began recruiting in June 1864 and was designated the 113th USCT by August 31. The regiment was stationed at Little Rock until April 1, 1865. And the 11th U.S. Colored Infantry was organized at Fort Smith on December 10, 1863. The regiment fought in the August 24, 1864 Battle of Gunther's Prairie in the Indian Territory, losing 3 dead and 14 wounded or missing. They transferred to Lewisburg, which is present-day Morrilton, and fought in the January 24, 1865 skirmishes at Boggs Mill. The 11th was stationed at Lewisburg and Little Rock. The 112th, 113th, and 11th regiments were chronically under strength, and on April 1, 1865, were consolidated as 113th U.S. Colored Troops, new. The combined regiments mustered out on April 9, 1866. The 69th U.S. Colored Infantry consisted of 5 companies organized at Pine Bluff, Devall's Bluff, Helena, and Memphis, Tennessee between mid-1864 and March 17, 1865. Company A served at Pine Bluff, Little Rock, and Bayou Fourche. Company B was at Pine Bluff. Company Z and C were at Fort Penny, a contraband camp near Helena. And Company D served at President's Island near Memphis before transferring to Pine Bluff in May 1865. The regiment was discontinued on September 20, 1865. Also, two black artillery batteries were raised in Arkansas. What would become Company E of the 2nd U.S. Colored Light Artillery was actually recruited in Helena as the 3rd Louisiana Light Artillery Battery, African descent, mustering in on December 1, 1863. Its designation was changed to Battery C on March 11, 1864, and then to Battery E on April 26 of '64. They served at boat guards on steamboats operating out of Helena and were in the fight at Wallace's Ferry, losing 3 dead, 2 wounded, and 1 missing. Also in the April 1, 1864 battle at Lamb's Plantation. The battery participated in several expeditions in 1864 and mustered out on September 26, 1865. The 1st Arkansas Light Artillery, African descent, was organized at Pine Bluff on June 4, 1864, and became Battery H, 2nd U.S. Colored Light Artillery, on December 13, '64. The only time they left the fortifications at Pine Bluff was to participate in an expedition to Mount Elba in early 1865, and they mustered out on September 15 of '65. 7 other black regiments, or detachments of regiments, saw action in Arkansas during the Civil War, and at least 100 black Arkansans served in the U.S. Navy. 2 black cavalry regiments and a heavy artillery battery would be stationed in the state during Reconstruction. Perhaps the largest Arkansas battle fought primarily by troops of African descent occurred on July 26, 1864, when Brigadier General Napoleon B. Buford, commander of the Federal District of Eastern Arkansas, sent out a reconnaissance in force from Helena to ascertain the force and design of Confederate cavalrymen in the area. The patrol, led by Colonel W.S. Brooks of the 56th U.S. Colored Infantry, consisted of 280 men of the 56th, 80 from the 60th U.S. Colored Infantry, and a 2-gun section of Battery E, 2nd U.S. Colored Artillery, under Captain Jonas Fred Lemke. Major Eagleton Carmichael commanded a party of about 150 troopers of the 15th Illinois Cavalry who steamed down the Mississippi to disembark at Old Town and work their way back toward Brooks' command by way of Trenton. And I'll mention here that these regiments, all of the officers were white, though black troops could serve as non-commissioned officers. Okay, the infantry force approached Big Creek about 22 miles southwest of Helena at 3 a.m. on the 26th, waiting until daylight to send a patrol across the creek. There they were told that Archibald Dobbins' Confederate cavalrymen had left the day before. The patrol rejoined the main body of infantry as Brooks set out pickets while he considered his next move. Suddenly, an hour later, Dobbins' horsemen attacked the little force from three sides. A Union report of the battle said that the least estimate of the rebel force was 3-to-1 of the Union force, the latter under fire for the first time. The black soldiers formed into battle lines and opened fire as the task force 2 artillery pieces roared into action. The Southerners returned fire, hitting Brooks and Lemke almost immediately, and both died. The African Americans fought desperately on. We formed our lines and held our position under severe and continued fire from the enemy, their lines being in places not more than 50 yards from our own, Lieutenant Colonel Moses Reed reported. For 4 hours, the black troops stood their own against Dobbins' horsemen. As they were about to be overwhelmed, the proverbial cavalry arrived. The horsemen of the 15th Illinois had heard the firing from Big Creek as they hunted rebel stragglers near Trenton. They circled around to the rear of the embattled Yankees and charged through a part of Dobbins' force that was closing in behind the black soldiers. The combined Union force then began a fighting withdrawal toward Helena, fighting off attacks from all sides. The rebel cavalrymen on 3 occasions by flank movement made a stand before the Union force, but were charged and dispersed in every instance. As the Yankees reached the junction of the Spring Creek Road about 11 miles from Helena, they faced a solid line of rebels, even as other Southern horsemen pressed them from behind. We immediately engaged them in front, driving them handsomely for 2 miles when they did not again molest us, Reed reported. The black regiments and their Illinois comrades lost 19 men killed, 40 wounded, and 4 missing, in addition to losing significant arms and supplies. Dobbins' losses were not reported, though Union reports list 7 Confederates killed and 5 captured. General Bruford, in reporting the battle, wrote, "Will they fight? Ask the enemy." Okay, the marker we're unveiling today also includes information on the 1st and 2nd Kansas Colored Infantry Regiments, which Jim Lane had recruited from escaped slaves from Arkansas, Missouri, and the Indian Territory before the Emancipation Proclamation took effect. In fact, the first was involved in combat well before 1863. During the 1864 Camden expedition, those regiments marched with John M. Thayer's Frontier Division out of Fort Smith, and they would be involved, one as victim and one as perpetrator, in 2 of the most infamous racial atrocities that occurred in the Civil War in Arkansas. The first of these occurred on April 18, 1864. The Union drive toward Louisiana had been blunted by Confederate resistance and a lack of supplies a week earlier, and the hungry army was now hunkered down in Camden. On April 17, General Frederick Steele sent a forage train to seize 500 bushels of corn stored 16 miles west of Camden. Among the escort for the 198 wagon train were 428 men and officers from the 1st Kansas Colored Infantry. After seizing half the corn, Confederate troops managed to burn half of it. The party headed back toward Camden, with empty wagons branching out to seize additional food. The Yankees also stole anything else that caught their fancy and piled it into the wagons. One rebel indignantly reported that the wagons were laden with every kind of provision from the farmyard, the pantry, the dairy, and the sideboard, men's, women's, and children's clothing, household furniture, gardening implements, the tools of the mechanic, and the poor contents of the Negro hut. Another soldier noted that they had feather beds and all the comforts about one's home in their wagons, clothing, etc. Wrong button again. Okay. As the federal escort increased to 1,169 men with the arrival of a relief column marched toward Camden, they encountered Confederate pickets at Poison Spring. As the Yankees halted, Brigadier General John Sappington Marmaduke rushed 3,621 rebel cavalry and artillerymen to confront the Union troops with an L-shaped ambush. The The 1st Kansas took position in the front of the train and fought off 2 attacks. Bloody and low on ammunition, the black soldiers were overwhelmed by a 3rd well-coordinated assault. The entire federal force soon collapsed and fled toward Camden, and the nightmare began for the survivors of the 1st Kansas Colored. Soldiers of the 29th Texas Cavalry, who had come out second best to the Kansans in a fight at Honey Springs in the Indian Territory the previous summer, looked for surviving blacks to finish off. They shouted to each other, "Where's the 1st Kansas N-word now?" All cut to pieces and gone to hell by bad management. Our Kansan Alfred Hearn wrote to his wife in Arkadelphia that, "I think there were 10 Negroes killed and 1 white fed. They made the Negroes go in front, and if the Negro was wounded, our men would shoot him dead as they were passed. And what Negroes that were captured have, from the best information I can obtain, since been shot. I've seen enough myself to know it is correct that our men is determined not to take Negro prisoners." The federal force at Poison Spring lost 240 men killed or missing and 97 wounded, of which the 1st Kansas suffered 117 killed and 65 wounded, amounting to a 42% loss for the regiment. Confederate losses were 13 dead, 81 wounded, and 1 missing. Following the disaster at Poison Spring and the loss of another 240 wagons and nearly 1,500 men a week later at Marks Mills, Steele decided he had had enough. The Yankees calmly abandoned Camden on the night of April 26, and stealing a march on the Confederates, made tracks for Little Rock. The rebels nipped at their heels, skirmishing heavily at several sites, but Lieutenant General Edmund Kirby Smith's main infantry column caught up with them at the crossing of the Saline River at Jenkins Ferry. The train of the sodden battle, Steele's infantry fought a desperate rearguard action on April 30 as the rest of the army crossed the swollen river on a pontoon bridge. The terrain of the sodden battlefield caused the Confederates to funnel their infantry into disjointed attacks, and the well-placed Yankees fought off while inflicting heavy casualties. During the attack, a section of Captain Samuel T. Ruffner's Missouri artillery placed two cannon across from the 2nd Kansas Colored Infantry. The black soldiers and white soldiers of the 29th Iowa Infantry promptly charged and overran the artillerists, and the men of the 2nd Kansas sought revenge for Poison Spring. Three Missourians were bayoneted as they tried to surrender, and the Kansans were preparing to do the same to 6 captured rebels when several Iowa soldiers came to their aid. The Negroes want to kill every wounded reb they come to, and will do it too if we do not watch them, Milton Chambers of the 29th Iowa reported. In a grisly reprise of Poison Spring in reverse, black soldiers prowled the battlefield seeking wounded Confederates. A Texas private reported that after Kirby Smith's army fell back, "I looked around and saw some black Negroes cutting our wounded boys' throats, and I thought my time would come next." Though he managed to escape, many others did not. A soldier of the 33rd Arkansas Infantry wrote that, "We found that many of our wounded had been mutilated in many ways, some with ears cut off, throats cut, knife stabs, etc. My brother, who was shot through the body, had his throat cut through the windpipe and lived several days. Retaliation would soon follow as wounded soldiers of the 2nd Kansas were murdered in Confederate hospitals in the weeks that followed." Okay. So while the African Americans, soldiers of Arkansas, did see scattered battles, the overwhelming majority of amount of their time was spent doing guard or fatigue duty at the garrisons at Helena, Little Rock, Devall's Bluff, Pine Bluff, or Fort Smith. Despite such issues and unequal pay and substandard hospitals, there were opportunities available to the men of the USCT units. Foremost among these, perhaps, was the chance to receive what would for many be their first formal schooling. Asa Randall, the chaplain of the 54th U.S. Colored Troops, championed the cause, writing that it is not only necessary for the elevation and protection of the colored people, but it is also necessary for the peace and future prosperity of the country. Randall noted that those who attended regularly when off duty are making good proficiency in the branches taught: reading, writing, spelling, geography, mental and written arithmetic. Many who do not attend the school are taking lessons in their quarters of those of their comrades who are more proficient. In addition, Army chaplains strengthened the bonds of soldiers and their families by giving official sanction to common law marriages, many of which dated to slavery. By the end of the Civil War, African American troops would comprise between 9 and 10% of the Union Army, providing 145 infantry regiments, 7 cavalry regiments, 12 heavy and light artillery batteries, and 1 regiment of engineers. A total of 178,985 enlisted men and 7,122 officers served in the black regiments during the war. Some 37,300, nearly 20% of the men involved, did not survive the war. Some dying in combat, far more falling to disease. Even with the disproportionate amount of time doing fatigue and guard duty, black soldiers fought in 449 engagements, including 39 major battles. 17 black soldiers and 4 sailors would win the nation's highest honor for valor, the Medal of Honor. But the greatest contribution of the United States colored troops was expressed by Amelia Thomas in Little Rock in the 1930s, who spoke about her father, George Grant. Amelia said, "He was on the Union side. He was fighting for our freedom. He wasn't no Reb. He'd tell us many a day, 'I am part of the cause that you are free.'" And I would be happy to answer any questions. Or shall we head? Oh, yes.
You mentioned a pioneer group. Can you explain what the pioneer group did?
Oh, this is the 100 men of the 4th Arkansas who served in the Camden expedition. They were assigned to the pontoon boat train, but they would also, Camden expedition, the roads were terrible, flooded and all like that. So the pioneers would chop down trees to corduroy the roads to so wagons could pass over and that sort of thing. They did a lot of that kind of work. Yes, ma'am.
What is the Camden expedition?
The Camden expedition was part of the Red River campaign. That the plan was for the federal troops to move up the Red River and attack Texas, take Texas. So troops from Little Rock and Fort Smith were to join the main Union Army at Shreveport, and those guys down in Louisiana got beat pretty badly long before our guys were able to get there. Yes.
You mentioned that, I think you said there were 3 main pictures of Arkansans who fought against other troops, and
Yeah,
one Brooks. The other was there.
Aaron Brooks, and the second one was James Baldwin, and then the third picture is that of the 57th U.S. Colored Troops Color Guard. Yes.
Lincoln appointed an African American to as a major to do recruiting, and I couldn't remember his name, and I thought that he may have come to Helena to help with recruiting.
I believe that he did. I can see the man's picture, but I can't remember his name either. So. Yeah, and it was really after the war that they started elevating some of the black soldiers to officers' positions.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, one more question.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had to pass a law allowing the black troops to join the Army. And they did well once they were able to. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mark. I believe at the very end, he said that between 9 and 10% of the Union soldiers is so important as we dedicate a historical marker out back to join the other markers that talk about Civil War events that happened here, the contributions of the African American soldiers in Arkansas and the 1st and 2nd Kansas during the Camden expedition. They are critical to interpreting Arkansas's Civil War history, and so we're glad that you are a part of it today. Right now, we're going to transition outside behind the museum. I'd like to recognize Representative Denise Ennett, who is here. As I said earlier, we received some funding for this project from the state. So Denise, if you would, as we do the unveiling, if you would represent the state, along with Ron Fuller, who is here in addition to being on my commission. He serves on the Arkansas History Commission. And then Mr. Grunwald and Mark, if you would join us there as well. So the easiest way to get out back is to go out front as you came in. The driest way is to go around the west side and come around the building. And we're going to be right down here at this corner. And so if you would just take a few minutes to meet us out back, and then we'll have the official unveiling and the dedication of the marker. Again, thank you so much for being here today, and I look forward to you joining us out back.
Here we go.
Wow. Oh, this is Saturday night. Oh, close to.
Well, you know, this is a real overdue piece of Arkansas's military history. Kind of when we think about what these soldiers, the colored troops, suffered here, trying to be, you know, to save the Union. So we're honored to have this plaque here at our museum as part of the history. We're glad to have Representative Ennett here today. Denise, you want to say a word?
Well, I want to thank you all for being here. This is Black History Month, and this is very fitting to have this here. On behalf of all of my family members who served in the military, this means a lot to us. It's not just Black history, it's American history. And I want to thank you all for having me here.